Welcome, everybody, to a brand new episode of the Jams and Tea podcast, where we spin the jams and spill the tea. And today we are going to be talking about two records in our main episode, two brand new records. First, we're going to be talking about the album from post-punk band Squid, the debut album Bright Green Field, and we're going to be talking about a much more storied post-punk acts, Iceage, Seek Shelter, and later on Record Club this week we are going to be talking about August's recommended album, which is Negative Land's Dyspepsy. Oh my god, and it's not stopping there. Oh man, and speaking of August, Glacier Flower 21 is out right now. There will be a link in the description. Please go on Bandcamp, go and buy that, go and stream that, go and listen to that. We will be talking about that album eventually on here, of course, naturally, as we are wont to do. Yes. And yeah, and also I released a new book, so
volume, what's the word? 7.
What's the word?
That's a number.
Yeah.
I
Got
am
him.
Absolute fool.
So if you're listening at home and you don't know what the fuck a Glacier Flower is, obviously it's August's ambient duo that he is a part of. The record is particularly like a darker style of ambient music, so if that is your jam, then go and check it out at the Bandcamp. I will be, well actually no, by the time you're watching this, there will also be an interview that I did with August and his creative partner Mason, who are Glacier Flower, about this album that you should go and check out. That will also be in the description as well. A lot of interesting insights into the creative process of Glacier Flower and how this specific record, which is very different from any previous Glacier Flower records, came to be. So please take the time to go and check that out. You will be supporting some great musicians and getting some good fucking spooky nighttime jams in the process. Yep. Anyway, let's jump into our opening segment, as we always do, with what we've been listening to in the last week that we are not already reviewing in the next few days. So, Jake, what have you been listening to lately?
Well, I have been listening to a goddamn lot because I've had to work a lot and I'm tired. But earlier in the week, to sort of kickstart the week, I just had like this 3-day long phase where I just fucking freebased jazz, just everything I could find. I was just like, this artist, and I just listened to all of it. And I won't read you through everything because good gosh, golly gosh, I listened to a whole lot of different shit. But I will say, I will point out some highlights. Highlight el numero uno would be, I did finally listen to Alice Coltrane's Journey to Satchidananda with Pharoah Sanders. Terrific record. But that's not the record I want to shout out, because the second record of Alice Coltrane's I checked out is a collaboration between her and Carlos Santana, who you might know from Santana's Abraxas. Serious Man fans out there, you all know, which I also did listen to that record.
Automobile accident.
Santana's Abraxas is a very good album. I listened to that. But their collab album.
That man knows his way around a fiddle.
I listened to their collaboration album, Illuminations, and I mean, to be blunt about it, I just think that's my favorite jazz album ever. It's genuinely one of the most beautiful albums I've ever heard in my life. The string arrangements are gorgeous. The guitar work has courtesy of Santana is very much in the same vein as the stuff that you would find on Miles Davis's tribute to Jack Johnson, or even Mahavishnu Orchestra's The Intermounting Flame. Combined with those string arrangements, it's just absolutely enthralling spiritual jazz album, and I recommend it to everybody. Apparently it's not super popular. Our friend Zach hit it with a 9 recently.
Well, I listened to it after you recommended it to me, and slapped a 10 on it because
As you should, frankly. It's only
just
37 minutes long too, so it's not exactly a commitment.
It's one of those things where like this wasn't like made by a superior race of aliens, like human beings got together to put this together.
110%. It's slowly transcending.
I just want to jump in at this point because I think what I want to add is going to be more relevant here than saving it for later. On this note, is I actually have a recommendation of something that I discovered while doing some research into this project. And so there's also a collaborative record between Carlos Santana and the Mahavishnu Orchestra, specifically called Love, Devotion, Surrender. I haven't heard the album in full, but I listened to a track that's quite heavily hyped on it called Let Us Go Into the House of the Lord. And it is interdimensional is the best way of describing it. So
there's a song called A Love Supreme on it. That's pretty, that's a statement.
I assume it's probably a variation of Coltrane's A Love Supreme.
Probably.
And there's also another Coltrane. It's actually looks like there's two other tracks on here that are Coltrane originals as well. But anyway, listen to this. I'm going to listen to the album in full, but basically it seems like there is an entire world of untapped, underappreciated 70s kind of fusion era stuff that people don't really seem to dive into. So that would be, I guess, our takeaway right now is that dig into this particular era of stuff because it is super underappreciated.
Yeah, it's easily my favorite like flavor of jazz that I've explored so far. So like getting to see this side of the career, like mainly through Coltrane, Alice Coltrane specifically, but I listened to that, like a lot of stuff from her. I listened to a lot of stuff from Herbie Hancock, which I really enjoyed. I listened to stuff from Sun Ra. I listened to stuff from McCoy Tyner, Pharoah Sanders, another re-listen to Mahavishnu Orchestra, re-listen to Bitches Brew, all that shit. But another discovery I made this week in the Avenue of Jazz is a bit more of a recent one. That would be one Mr. Kamasi Washington. I have been going through all of his projects, both big and small, and I was originally going to shout out his EP here. Not The Choice, because that's something that goes along with one of his albums, but an EP called Harmony of Difference, which is really, really great. And that was my favorite project of his until I listened to Kamasi Washington's most recent record, Heaven and Earth, which is holy shit. It's the sort of thing you got to get over with him is the fact that like his two main albums so far run north of 2 hours, which is a lot. That said, I enjoyed every single second of this record, like front to back, not a moment wasted. Definitely leans more into the spiritual jazz leanings of his sound. He likes to sort of play with tons of different kinds of jazz, especially on his better known project, The Epic, is something that tries to cover kind of every single phase, but also sort of do his own thing too. But this is a bit more of a traditional sounding thing. It's got a bit more of a psychedelic bent to it, and I really, really loved it. It was fucking fantastic. But so yeah, like if you're just looking for like a good jazz album or project, one of his EPs or one of his albums so far, he has yet to miss with me. I went back to a project that I remembered really, really loving that I haven't visited in a while, and that would be Daughter's album, You Won't Get What You Want. That album got released on like a limited edition colored vinyl, and I was just like, this is fucking $20-$30. Fuck yeah, let's go. And then I was just like, I need to listen to this again first before I make that purchase. And needless to say, I made that purchase. God, what a fucking record. Oh my God. Listening to that, especially after you familiarize yourself with like Daughter's entire catalog, is so fascinating because it's wholly unlike anything they made up until that point. I mean, there are definitely elements of some things that they did with like mathcore and grindcore and like some elements of the sound, of course, but it's just like, it's way more post-rocky and even post-punky in places, but it's just so fucking hellish It's so unruly and restless and evil. God, it's a fucking nasty, nasty, dark, like stare into the abyss stares into you kind of album. And God, I love it.
I listened to that as well, re-listened to that as well this week when you brought it up. I listened to it on the way to the airport actually, and like 5 a.m, and it was like that album is that album is like what it's like so like over like saturated in music culture. Like everyone knows this album now, but it really came back to it with a bit of distance from that. It really is just one of the best, it really is just one of the best noise rock albums of the last 10 years. Like it's on another level. Every single track is interesting in its own way. And then by the time you get to like the back half of the record, and like my favorite track changes basically every time I listen to this record, but I was particularly blown away by The Reason They Hate Me this time, which is just like, so serrated. Like the guitar soloing towards the end of that track is like pure. It's like it's guitar being played with shards of glass. It's so fucking demented. I adore it.
Yeah, it's I love that album so much. It's such an ambitious undertaking. There's like a pseudo kind of documentary, I think, on the Daughters YouTube channel about how they like made that album. Really interesting and totally worth a watch if you're into them or into that album in any respect. I'd also recommend listening to it with like the best headphones possible and whatnot, just because it's a very sonically intricate record too. Like there's just so much to notice and so much to appreciate and so much texture too. It's like, I mean, I struggle to think of a noise rock album I like more than it, frankly.
When I first put it on, like I was a car stereo this time, but even when you put it on with headphones, and you're in the opening track and you're just listening to that simmering kind of industrial sound, and then that first kind of like snare hit just like claps, and it's like the loudest thing in the world. Yeah, it's so fucking. It's the dynamics on that record are just really fucking stellar.
I got into my car as soon as Long Road No Turns came on, which like turns anytime you are in the car into like you're playing Mario Kart and the blue shell is following you and you're just like it's so fucking like it's just like these stabs of guitar noise. They're just like and it's fucking it's so good, great record. I also gave I listened to for the first time, I listened to Yo La Tengo's I Can Hear the Heart Beating as One. Terrific album. Of the Yo La Tengo records I have heard, I'd say that's my second favorite. I think I listened to the 3 sort of albums of theirs, including that one that I had in like one go. Painful, I Can Hear the Heart Beating as One, and then Nothing Turned Itself Inside Out. And I think I prefer And Then Nothing very slightly, just because I like the really nocturnal kind of jangly sound that album has to the other two. Like Painful kind of has that as well, but that's just sort of my take on it. Like I find it's really like they're all pretty consistent projects, but I think like the only song that I don't particularly care for on And Then Nothing is the one where it's like there's like an a cappella that's worked into the instrumental of the song, and it's like it's just a little annoying.
Oh,
like
please tell me you're not talking about You Can Have It All.
I don't remember the track name, to be perfectly honest with you, but it's just like
okay, well that has like a ba 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 da ba 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 ba. Are you talking about
that's
that?
Oh no,
fuck,
yeah, it's
I love that
it's
song.
Wow.
Okay,
it's not
that's
bad,
okay,
but I like it. Like I thought it was gonna lead into an instrumental, but that's the whole song.
I'll forgive you that, Jake, because you liking that record as much as you do is just like super fucking cool. To me, like I Can Hear the Heart and Then Nothing are kind of like sister albums because they're like similar in length and they kind of sprawl. And like I Can Hear the Heart is like the sunset record, and then Nothing's like 2 a.m. album where you're just kind of like sit like laying in your bed, or you're like it's more like you're laying in a field in the middle of the city in a park. And like I absolutely adore the closing track on And Then Nothing, the just sprawling Night Falls Over Hoboken, where it's just like for 17 minutes you're just like bathing in this like nocturnal sound.
Fucking love that part. It's so good.
It's interesting because the first time I listened to I Can Hear the Heart, about a year and a half ago now, I really gravitated to the more fuzzy rock songs on that album. But now what I really gravitate to about Yolo Tango in general is the more atmospheric, vibey stuff that they do.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, what's
Um,
awesome about them is that all of their best records, and like this is basically just every record they put out, has a balance of both of those things.
Absolutely, yeah.
Like they never just do one mode. They're always like moving between those kind of noisier shoegaze influenced modes and that kind of more nocturnal, dreamy mode.
Mhm.
And that's why
Yeah,
I think I Can Hear the Heart, especially like the first half of that record, is like their absolute peak for me, because they are just executing both iterations of that sound so flawlessly, and also in such compact packages as well, because they do those like sprawling guitar bangers that go on for like 10-15 minutes, but they don't really need to do that as much in that particular era. But yeah, just having tracks like Sugar Cube and Damage and Stockholm Syndrome and Shadows and Autumn Sweater all lined up like that, it's honey to my ears.
Yeah. So what I've been listening to, didn't listen to a whole lot, so I'll go through it quickly. First thing from the up and coming post-punk art punk group Dry Cleaning. I listened to their debut record New Long Leg, which came out a month or two ago, mainly at the behest of my dad, and we just kind of talked about it. It's an all right record. Certainly glad we didn't really cover it for the podcast, because quite honestly, it's a band where I see the potential they have to make something very interesting, but the songwriting is just not quite there. Like a lot of the hooks are quite considerably weak, and it's like only a couple of the instrumental ideas feel really all that developed. But I mean it's interesting, I guess. It's all right. And the last new thing I listened to this week was from Judas Priest, Sad Wings of Destiny, one of the kind of early heavy metal progressive rock albums in their expansive catalog. This record's really good. Great even.
Hell yeah.
I particularly love how it's a record that can go from like this really tender progressive rock to like this proper heavy metal song to like a piano ballad in the middle, just to have fun.
They are a much more versatile band than a lot of people will have you believe, because like a lot of people familiarize themselves with those albums like Painkiller and whatnot, or Firepower most recently, but like even then those are albums that have more versatility. But like their early stuff is really proggy. They have some speed metal stuff that's like just absolutely fucking will melt your face off. They're a terrific band.
Yeah, no, this was, I agree. This was real good. It makes me curious to check out the other 1,500 Judas Priest albums, of which I have heard like 2 of.
They're mostly pretty great.
Yeah.
Mostly.
There's some not so great.
You can skip Jugulator. It's fine. You can just.
I mean, I think I will always skip an album called Jugulator.
An album called Jugulator should only be released by the Insane Clown Posse.
Its album cover is also like, if you look at it, you're just like, oh, why is this version of the album cover so low res? And then you look and you're like, oh no, this is just what the album cover looks. Why?
You buy the vinyl and it's like 420p.
It's like you try to find a more high def version of it, and you're just like, why did they do this? What's wrong with them?
You get the vinyl and you can like see whole squares where the pixels are.
There you go.
It's just a section of colors.
Does
it's
real
like
life
the XI cover, you know, like.
Does real life have like a frame rate, a pixel resolution? What's going on here?
Turn up the resolution, please. It doesn't upscale.
Sorry, reality is running at 20 frames per second. Like, get new RAM.
Gosh, of course, it had to be a Wednesday. Yeah, but that's what I listened to. Good stuff.
Only drop frame rate on days that end in Y. Okay. So in terms of what I listened to this week, I think I'll just go ahead and start with the worst of what I listened to.
Oh,
Oh dear.
The current least favorite album of the year, was Van Weezer.
Good job, Rivers.
And the worst thing about it, I think, is that I can't even really be like I can't really point to anything on it that's like, this is what makes this worse than any of the last 5. 4 or 5. I don't. Who fucking cares? It's simply just I'm tired. I'm tired of this.
I am tired of Earth. These people.
It's just, I mean, it's literally just another Weezer album. This one has like some more 80s pop rock flair, but it's more Rivers being a fucking sex pest.
Stealing the riffs from Crazy Train.
That's the thing. Like, am I super off base in saying that there is a large portion of Van Weezer that does not sound largely different from other things Weezer have done before?
No, absolutely not. Like, it's always been about like packaging with Weezer anyway. Pacific Daydream, for instance, was supposed to be like a full-on pop album, and then like maybe half of it even tries to be that. The rest of it's just polished, same old Weezer. And I think with and the Black Album is another great, probably even the best example of this, where it's like they present this record as it's going to go for a particular aesthetic, and then it just abandons that aesthetic entirely. Van Weezer for me is a record that just kind of falls into that same sort of grey, dull area as Pacific Daydream and the Black Album. I don't think it's one of the worst Weezer albums. I guess that's maybe one way in which I differ from Morgan, but I really don't have this. There's a couple of songs I think are kind of fun in a really corny way. Like, I don't mind I Need Some of That, for instance. That's a solid 6 out of 10 song. But the rest, for the most part, it's all just kind of vaguely inoffensive and occasionally offensive. Just really dry. And it sounds awful. I think the worst album of the year award's still going to have to go to Typhoons for me so far. But they're very similar. They're very similar records in the sense that they both. One of the most irritating aspects of both is just this kind of suffocating slickness that's supposed to sound cool, but just sounds absolutely like ugly.
You said that, and I turned into Cameron Fry from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. I'll shit a diamond.
Another great comparison between Typhoons, which I listened to in the week, but I'm not going to mention in my segment, and Van Weezer, is that they both want to be huge divergences for the artist, but the moments in which they work are where they just do the thing the artist does.
Yeah, it's not anything all that much worse from the last several. I will die on the hill that it is markedly worse than OK Human, though. At least just because it was an interesting diversion. That's all I have for that. In preparation for one of our reviews this week, I listened to De La Soul's debut album, 3 Feet High and Rising. And
I think we all listened to it, didn't we?
Yeah, probably. I enjoyed it quite a bit. It's too long, and my brain can't help but go, I just like A Tribe Called Quest more, which is not exactly fair, but it's kind of a default.
But you're not exactly wrong.
And they're also on the album, so
Q-tip.
We'll get into that when we
Jonathan Davis.
We'll get into that when we because we're reviewing a 1991 retrospective video on De La Soul Is Dead, the second De La Soul album. So we'll get into the relationship between De La Soul and Tribe when we get into that video. But yeah, I'm both not surprised that generally you guys seem to be less enthusiastic about De La Soul than Tribe, for instance. I'm both not surprised by that, and also a little bit sad, but you know, it's fair. whatever.
Well, you don't know what I think of De La Soul is dead yet. So.
I don't. That's true. That's true. I think we can all probably. I mean, I don't know where August is going to fall on this, but I think we maybe can all agree that De La Soul is Dead is the superior album of the two.
On a similar trend, I did also listen. I'll just do all three of these at once here. I re-listened to this morning and last night. Wu-Tang Clan's Enter the Wu-Tang 36 Chambers, which I mean, it had been years, like to such a degree that I couldn't comfortably rate it again. So this re-listen was really important. I was just like, well, son of a bitch, they were right. I don't have it at I still give it a 9 to maybe even like a 9.5, just because I do think some of the they're not even, I wouldn't even call them skits, but like the more conversational parts of the album go on just a little bit too long on occasion. But like it's just fucking it's 36 Chambers. I did also listen to Tribe Called Quest, Slow End Theory, and Midnight Marauders this morning and into this afternoon, and like, hot damn, also they were right. And I will finish this off by mentioning that I listened to Pianos Become the Teeths, The Lack Long After, and didn't shoot myself in the brain afterwards. So that I feel is commendable. Because that's a 37-minute record that feels about as long as the fucking Caretaker record. It is
Ouch.
miserable. It is a 10, and I mean, I may never listen to it again. Thank you. Continue.
Okay. So I listen to a lot, but not a lot that either hasn't already been talked about or is sort of. I listen to a lot of stuff I don't have a lot to say about. So, but I would start off by saying I listened to a record from 1964, that being Dust Bowl Ballads by Woody Guthrie. A very old sort of workman's folk record. And hot damn, it's incredible. It's rated on Radio Music as a number 6 of that year, I think. And things about Radio Music is like, if it's a record from like the 40s through to the end of the 60s and it's not jazz, it has to be fucking incredible to crack that top 10. And yeah, Woody Guthrie goddamn did it with this just really bleak but characterful folk record. And I saw a comment on Radio Music for it. It was like, when did folk music stop being this and start becoming like teenagers with barely repressed emotions? And it's like, I see where you're coming from, but both of you're both beautiful, okay?
No need to demean two queens.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Yes, instead of teenagers with barely repressed emotions, it was grown-ass men with barely repressed emotions.
And the 2020s is the decade of the transgender people with barely repressed emotions.
I see what that sentiment gets at, but it's also greatly reductive.
Yeah.
But also get kicked in the balls.
Yes, but no, I love this record, and if anyone feels like they're gonna like it, I recommend it. I listened to Swans, Children of God, which oh boy, that's a long record that is never anything less than amazing.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, like the thing is about Swans, right? Is I've listened to 4 of their albums now. Previously being Filth, The Glowing Man, and The Seer. And I hadn't yet found a Swans. I liked them all to varying degrees, but there wasn't one that was like, this is my Swans record. And Children of God didn't quite get there, but it was closer than any of them.
I'm sorry, Susha, I'm kind of, maybe I just assumed that everyone had, but I'm kind of stunned you haven't listened to any 90s era Swans. like White Light, soundtracks for the blind.
I was about to say White Light is just like, hey, you know how you like folk music? Well,
yeah, exactly. I was about to say the reason I bring that up is because like there's a heavy kind of folk and kind of gothic folk aesthetic to all of those albums.
The Burning World also.
Yeah. What I'll say is that White Light is the one that I have at a 9, verging on a 10. You know, probably the biggest Swans skeptic here, whatever the fuck that means.
I don't believe swans exist.
Yeah.
Not real. Michael Gira's fake.
I believe it when I
Have you ever seen a swan in person yourself?
Yes.
Something.
No,
hot
you
fuzz
have.
Joke.
That's something a swan propagandist would say. You and your
You would also.
swanology.
Wow.
You would also really like the side project Angels of Light, and probably some people really. Yeah, kind of. Some people really ride for My Father Will Guide Me up a, I can't remember the entire title.
Up a Rope to the Sky.
Up a Rope to the Sky. Some people really ride for that album, and I can totally see you being one of those people.
It's been on
Who
my
is
list
you in this instance?
Well, to be honest, either of you, really.
Word.
Nice. It's interesting with that era. I was going through Swan's discography on Wikipedia because I was bored. And it's interesting that the only 2 albums labeled on Wikipedia as folk are the 2 albums made when there wasn't a drummer in the band, and I think that's just very funny to me. But I'll also mention that for my personal channel, I'm doing a project where I review 100 records of a certain genre as defined by Radio Music. And the one I'm doing first is Dream Pop / Shoegaze. I'm going to talk about a few records I've discovered doing that in the past week. One of which is Swerve Diver, Mescal Head, which I think also Deep Cuts did in their Shoegaze episode of 5 albums to get you into. And that was the first one from the project. And it's a really weird, interesting album that combines shoegaze ideas with like alternative rock and grunge. And it's just like real powerful, punch in the chest sort of power rock. And I recommend that a lot. I want to talk about this album I listened to called Like Daughter by Midwife. The cover of which is just like a decrepit mattress in the middle of the street, which is just like, do you like Slowdive and the Antlers, I guess? Do you like those 2 bands? You will like this record. Well done. And I had that thought, if you like Slowdive, you'll like this album. Listening to a third record, the last one I'm going to talk about today, although I'll also mention I listened to the Foxing debut record and like that a bunch, but I'm going to focus on this other one. Mojave 3, Ask Me Tomorrow. It's this Americana slow chord dream pop record. And I was like, wow, this reminds me a lot of like Slowdive if they did Americana. And I checked it out, and 2 of the members were in Slowdive.
Rachel, what's her face is in it, I think.
Goswell.
Goswell. That's the one.
And Neil Halstead, I think. But yeah, and I love that record so much. It's my favorite one I've done for the project so far. I've also done Emma Ruth Rundle's album, what's it called? Marked for Death, which is, I was surprised by how like heavy that is. But it's real good.
It's a complete misnomer calling that dream pop. I don't understand where that came from.
Rate your music tags be like.
It does kind of fit into a couple of vaguely shoegazy ideas, but I wouldn't call it shoegaze.
Yeah. I mean, it feels like calling Deftones shoegaze. It's like, but I mean, but like, no.
Yeah. But I like that
This
a lot.
won't be the last time today that the issue of like whether a just generally accepted genre label for something is actually appropriate is going to come up.
I'm sure. I'm very sure about that.
Every review today.
Yeah, well, I mean,
and through all of them, I will simply not care.
I mean, De La Soul, I think is definitely a hip hop album.
Yeah.
No, it's actually lowercase. It's musique concrète.
I still don't know what the
Lowercase?
hell.
Yeah,
I still don't know
lowercase.
what the hell negative land is. Still trying
You
to figure that
pleb,
out.
not knowing what
Plunder
lowercase
phonics.
is.
I actually think Marked for Death is sound collage. But no. But my favorite one, and I've done upwards of, I think I've done like 7 or 8 of them now. And
I
my
need
Harvey
a
3.
ventilator.
Excuse me?
That's okay. Don't worry. Continue.
And my Harvey 3's Ask Me Tomorrow is my favorite one that I've done thus far.
Beautiful.
Word.
So as for first listens this week, I don't really have much to report on. In fact, I think I'm just going to report on, let me just have a quick look through. Yeah, I'm just going to report on one album, which has dominated my week. I've listened to it 3 times on 3 separate occasions, and it has really left a really strong impact. It's an incredibly emotional album. It's an incredibly mature and finessed and poetic record, even for this songwriter. And I had high expectations because this is a beloved record by several people that I know. But I was not expecting them to be as thoroughly exceeded as they were. And some of you may have figured out what I'm talking about, which is the Mountain Goats album, The Life of the World to Come, which is, I'm not going to say it's my favorite Mountain Goats record because it's not quite at that level, but really that's more just a product of stiff competition. It's very close at the top between, the only ones I put ahead of it are We Shall All Be Healed and The Sunset Tree. But this is also like a completely different record to either of those two. It's very, like as I said, it's restrained. The songwriting is intimate at points, not in sound at all, but in points in some of the spirit of the songwriting. I was even reminded of like a bit of Phil Elverum stuff spiritually, and just the entire atmosphere of this record is devastating. There's some really heart-wrenching songs on here that also are not melodramatic in how heart-wrenching they are. It's just a beautiful album, and I was thoroughly impressed that I loved it as much as I did, considering that my Mountain Goats binge or my Mountain Goats ongoing enjoyment felt like I was kind of pushing it a bit with how many of these records I genuinely loved. And yet here comes another one to swoop in to that pile. And yeah, so fucking Jesus. A very, very special album.
I mean, it's interesting that like Get Lonely
nice
and this one
life.
are broken up by Heretic Pride, which is a much more like exuberant album. But I feel like Get Lonely is like a response to what they did on the Sunset Tree, and then this album is like building off of that and going further down that like obtuse rabbit hole. And as a result, it takes way more like unpicking, but there's so much like depth there once you've done that. And they're really getting into what they do for the next few albums, which is building like emotional portraits of a moment rather than getting involved in like big bombastic narratives. And also, yeah.
I was going to say absolutely. One of the things about it that I love is that obviously the record is loosely based around a kind of theme of faith, more or less. Obviously, all the track titles are Bible verses. But what I like about this unifying concept is that it's not really it's seldom immediately apparent how it ties into what the songs are actually about. You have to actually sit with the songs for a bit and think about the characters in the songs and think about the stories in the songs. And then you'll start to realize what the connections are. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it. Like it was really like, in many senses, this is the most kind of like poetic album that I've heard from John Darnielle up to this point. It's really like there's beautiful, the words themselves and the stories he tells are beautiful on the surface, but also when you start to think about them and start to unpack these stories, they just only get more and more beautiful.
Yeah, it's certainly true that what they did on Get Lonely and The Life of the World to Come is the most comparable to what they're doing on the tracks from their new album that I've heard so far, the 4 of them. So that's something to get excited about, I guess. And it's also true that like faith is such a big part of it, but of course what Mountain Goats do a lot is be openly faithful but subvert that with like Heretic Pride is a great example where it's all to do with like the reality of the idea of faith, but being a dark person within a faithful world. A great example is one of the songs on The Life of the World to Come unlocked for me when I watched a Mountain Goats Little Desk NPR video.
Oh yeah.
And John Daniel admitted that one of the songs was written watching Mario Bava's Black Sunday. And then I re-listened to the song and it's full of borrowed imagery and it's just full
August, I'm gonna need a Mario Bava / Jalo sign.
Yeah. I just
You've been
feel
thinking about it, don't lie.
like part of my soul like left my body in that moment.
I saw it happen before my very eyes.
I at least had the pleasure of not being as surprised because I know that John is like super into like horror cinema and that sort of stuff, and there's a lot of shared interests between the two of you. So it also explains a lot about your affinity for his song.
Yeah, it's part of why I love them. But what's great is that he takes a perspective of the villain, as he does in so many things he does.
Michael Myers resplendent.
Well, absolutely. And then he has a song that takes perspective of the character at the end of a Mario game that says a princess is in a different castle, and it's one of his best songs.
Motherfucker made a concept album about Dungeons and Dragons.
He did.
Anyway, so that's my week. Done and dusted. Okay, let's move on. Let's move on to our main reviews for today. The first album that we're going to be reviewing is Iceage are a Danish art punk band who have excitingly reinvented themselves a number of times now, while always kind of sounding the same, like a drunken bar band thrashing through the passion. They're kind of debatably their best record, certainly the one that I think is the most widely beloved. I think it got like a strong 9 from Anthony Fantano. Is 2014's Plowing into the Field of Love, which is also coincidentally my favorite Iceage record. I think that is a really interesting angular, storming, and also kind of quite avant-garde at points, very post-punky record. But since then, they have moved away from that punkier kind of groove-heavy stuff. And which also, that kind of record also marked the beginning of their interest in Americana as an influence as well. Although it was kind of in fleeting, like it was on the big single for that record, The Lord's Favorite, but then it's kind of become more prominent on their subsequent records. And also, in tandem with that, they have dipped into other forms of kind of American music as well to infuse their style in different ways. And so Seek Shelter is kind of like an embrace of soulful classic rock. Bands like the Rolling Stones, for instance, I think are the biggest visible influence on this iteration of Iceage. But also you've got spoonfuls of Oasis and Stone Roses thrown in, sprinkled in as well. Although I will say that more than the Stones, the band this record reminded me of the most is Primal Scream, particularly at the peak of their genre fusion pastiche, where they're like integrating that Rolling Stones-esque kind of classic rock barroom sound with like psychedelia and weird and stranger sonic textures with their guitars and stuff. And I think a huge part of what makes the sound of this record remind me of that is the fact that this album was produced by Pete Kember, who was one half of the legendary psychedelic noise duo Spacemen 3, whose fusion of guitar wizardry and walls of sound and also bluesy American traditionalism was singular and would filter heavily into his bandmate Jason Pierce's subsequent group Spiritualized. So there's a whole tradition of kind of like British music from Spiritualized, Spacemen 3, Primal Scream in the 90s that was kind of like a pastiche fusion of psychedelia and noise with these kind of classic tropes. basically. And I think that with Seek Shelter, Iceage are kind of tapping into that as well, maybe even trying to kind of revive it a bit, which is an interesting direction for them. Not a particularly surprising one, considering where their music has been headed. But what I like about Seek Shelter, even though it's far from one of my favorite Iceage records on the whole, what I like about it is that it does seem very focused in this aim. And you get a lot of tracks that kind of tread this line and explore this sound in interesting ways. And I think bringing on someone like Pete Kember, formerly known as Sonic Boom, to produce this record is a smart decision. He definitely gives it a lot of that psychedelic grit from that particular time. And so I think it is a really interesting and cool record. I have some more thoughts on some of the tracks, but I'd love to hear what you guys think about this album, and if you have any history with Iceage. I don't know if many of you do, but what do you think of this record, and how does it land for you guys?
It's all right, but I think there are some really interesting elements to it. I guess the first thing that really strikes me about it is, like, as you mentioned, the production of it, which I think is going to be the point where you really get off or on with the album, because a lot of it sounds really blaringly loud. And that's most certainly an intentional choice, but it's one I find myself at odds with, in that I think it works really well on tracks like Vendetta, where there's a certain aggression to the song, but on songs like Shelter Song, I don't think that same level of production has quite the same impact it would, because it feels like what they're going for is a little, I guess, tonally disconnected from what it ends up being. Like, we're doing this lyrically dour song, but it has these bright, flashy keyboards that are just blown out in the mix of the song.
What I think is interesting about that is, so Iceage are kind of like critical darlings. They're a band that a lot of people are very quick to heap praise onto, but they're also kind of like an esoteric band, and they're also a band that I think it's not an aspect that I think bludgeons you over the head, but also a band that are kind of like quite sort of ironic and sort of pastiche, as I've already said, but like they are kind of like everything that they do seems to be kind of like with a wink and a kind of a reverence that has left a lot of people cold, I know, and I wouldn't be surprised if it leaves a number of you cold as well. As I said, I'm not a huge Iceage fan. Like, I'm not a complete convert like some people seem to be, but I do appreciate their commitment to the bit. And with Shelter Song, I like this track quite a bit, actually. I think it's a really one of the standouts on the record. And I think that what's interesting about it is that when I listen to it, to me, it's like their twist on a song like Blur's Tender, for instance, which is the song it reminded me the most of, and also like a Let It Bleed era Rolling Stones as well, like one of the big sort of sweeping grand songs on a record like that with the female vocals and stuff. But I like the fact that you can hear those antecedents in it, and that influence, but also like the sound of it, the mix of it, that loudness that you allude to, and that kind of like fuzziness of it. It adds to the kind of drunken, I guess, splendor of the album. Like the whole thing with Iceage is when I listen to them, I feel like I'm completely intoxicated and just kind of like blaring into a barroom microphone, basically. And then their frontman, Elias Ronnenfeld, definitely kind of goes for that sort of style in this performance, which I could see being divisive.
I mean, that is absolutely the appeal of this record for me. Like, it reminds me of like, what if like the Viagra Boys record was good in a way, this album.
Well, the difference is that like the Viagra Boys have kind of like ideas, but they're not good musicians. I think that's the key difference.
But they're both going for like they're both Scandinavian, weirdly, but they're both going for that kind of how much like fun is it possible to put in this record. And I don't have a lot of fun in the Varied Voice record, but with this one, it's like every single track at varying points, I'm like, yes, if I could like go outside in this economy, I would be like walking down the street feeling like the coolest motherfucker in existence. And that's just like in a way, like whether it's like artistically groundbreaking for the band, I don't really care, because for me it's like, wow, I am having some of the most fun I've had with a record this year just listening to it.
Yeah, it's not like I don't think it's like particularly artistically groundbreaking or anything. Like I said,
No,
they're
no,
kind
no,
of
of
been heading
course.
in this direction, but it definitely, to me, I mean, whether you like it or not, I think it has the feel of like an assured band who are like quite confident at this point. They have their style down, they have their whole aesthetic down, and whether they, integrate different kind of historical precedents into their sound from record to record, and that might differ. But yeah, I think I really enjoyed the assuredness of this record. I found it to be one of the more immediate sounding Iceage albums as well, which I think was a pleasant surprise. Because I mean, again, I could see this I could see this perspective not being necessarily shared by everyone, but in the past with Iceage, I've kind of like this woozy, hazy quality to their music is kind of like with the last record, Beyondless, which I like quite a bit. In fact, I'd say I'd give it about the same rating as I'm going to give this. I like that record quite a bit. Had a couple of really great singles. They brought Sky Ferreira on that album. Yeah, really dope record. But it also at the same time, it felt like they were kind of losing some of the grit that their music needed and the kind of haze of the sound of it. And I think that they kind of their songs are a little bit more anchored here on this record, I think. And they're even, because I mean, I can remember songs on this record, and there are even parts of it that I think are quite catchy. So I definitely, on the whole, think that this is a net positive for Iceage.
Yeah, but just like comment on one of August's criticisms, which is on some of the slower songs, that blaring production can be a hindrance. For me, like the texture of that that conjures when they're aiming for that words, when they're aiming for the sort of maybe soft spoken moments, but with that same like really high energy, very compressed production. Well, that creates for me is a sense of like haze, is almost like a sense of like nostalgia, because it's so blown out that it creates a lot of like fuzz around it, but in like there's a loss of information, like sonic information, I mean. And it just creates this really like nostalgic, dreamy comfort on those slower moments, where in the more high octane moments, it's like blaring and pummeling, I guess.
Totally.
To go back to the the Viagra Boys comparison for a second, I think the biggest connection there is obviously their take on In Spite of Ourselves, on whatever the hell that album is called.
Yeah.
The biggest point of comparison there being Seek Shelters, or Ice Age's On Seek Shelters interpolation of Will the Circle Be Unbroken on High and Hurt. And I think this is where the sort of my how I feel about the album can be sort of explained in this comparison, because that interpolation of Will the Circle Be Unbroken is like the easy highlight of this album for me. It feels like it's in, maybe it is ironic in some way, but the whole album is sort of soaked in sort of Americana influence that I don't really think it is at all. It sounds like a very honest and musically up to snuff version of a sort of classic folk song almost. Whereas the Viagra Boys, In Spite of Ourselves, is just lazy and sloppy and annoying. This is just the complete opposite end of that spectrum. And I enjoyed it a lot, to such a degree that all of the original material on here I enjoyed notably less. I come away with largely, or not largely, but generally positive feelings on this album. But and for reasons that I'm unable to articulate rather frustratingly, it also just sort of failed to make me feel a whole lot. I don't know. there's not really any parts of it that I can point to and be like, this is where it lost me. But the whole album, to me, pretty much the whole album felt sort of like a comfy through line of like, hey, all right.
And I do think you make an interesting point. I kind of want to build off in response to the production about kind of the playing and the performance of this. How a lot of it is considerably quite clean and good, and I think that's something really interesting, especially for me in comparison to the what Tyler you said about the kind of drunkenness about the record, like that dichotomy perhaps is
Yeah.
something to be
Well,
noted.
The thing is, like, with the haziness of it, like this record and the last Iceage record, both of them I kind of left me a little bit cold the first time I heard them. And this is one way in which, again, I'm grateful for the podcast, because coming back to them again, I started to kind of get the vibe, and I started to kind of sink into the songs a little bit more. And I think the cleanness of a lot of the way that it's produced, and just the fact that I'm such a big fan of that Spaceman 3 / spiritualized warm guitar sound. I think one track that it really stands out as being sounding really nice on is Love Kills Slowly, which is one of my favorite songs on this record, where it's just, again, it's so warm, and Elias's voice is really intimate right at the front of the mix as well, which I think is good, because with his particular tone where he kind of favors this slurring, again, drunken style, I think if you were too far back, it would just sound like some random hobo had just stumbled into the studio rambling. But the fact that he's right there in the face and you can kind of like make out some of the things he's saying, with that distinct kind of Danish drawl of his, I think is a smart decision and helps the track to land. And that's a kind of emblematic of where the record really does pick up for me. The more listens I give it.
Seeing as I'm the podcast role that I am seemingly fitting in this new year of our Lord, is the fact that I am the idiot here among us.
Whoa.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna be real and try not to, linger on it too much. It's just, I just found this shit really fucking boring, man. It really does go down to the production of the, like, it's not even so much that the blaring loudness bothered me. It's the fact that the vocals are mixed so fucking high and the instruments sound like they were being recorded on another continent. Like, it's really fucking grating to listen to, like, especially if you're listening to more music when you're sitting down and like actually listening to a bunch of stuff. Like, getting through this like actually became grueling on occasion, and I just that part of the album did not really suit me, and the fact that it really wasn't offering anything else in terms of appeal for me personally just didn't really help. I found, like Morgan, I found that sort of interpolation of Will the Circle Be Unbroken to be a highlight, mainly because it was in fact something that I registered as being like an idea, like, because when I'd go back and like listen to it, I'd just kind of be like, oh wait, what are they doing here? And then I would sort of like, I'd listen very intently and be like, oh yeah, that's that song, okay, cool. And I like the way they kind of put it together and mix it with their own thing. That's kind of nice. And yeah, the whole album is just, it's so dry. It's just so fucking, it sounds like it's in a fucking miasma. I just don't, the lyricism is so esoteric that I have a hard time putting together the meanings of specific songs. I think the only real thing I took away from it was the first song, which is Shelter Song, which is sort of like taking all of these extremities of like, like has this sort of character with the lead singer, sort of like taking them in and like protecting them from all of these like ridiculous, outlandish like things and the storms and all of these lyrical things. And I was like, I appreciate this on that kind of level. I get what the song's going for, and instrumentally it still just really does nothing for me. And honestly, it's just rinse and repeat with the whole record, is that it's just, It's very slow. I, like Tyler, do feel kind of drunk during this album. The thing is that it's just like a good drunk album is like being wine drunk, and this makes me feel vodka drunk, where I'm just waiting for the night to end. And it's like, yeah, the instrumentation is fine, it's all well arranged and stuff. It's not a stupendously long album. Songs are fully formed, but I came away with this as ambivalent as anyone could possibly walk away from something.
I will say
It's
that
entirely.
sorry.
I was just gonna say it's an entirely valid reaction.
Yeah.
You're not at all an idiot for that.
Yeah. I like the idea. Sorry.
I just can't blame you for walking away from anything being like, I don't know, this didn't tickle my fancy. In fact, I respect you phrasing it in that way instead of sitting here and trying to articulate and bloviate meaninglessly as to why your ultimate conclusion was because
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's just not worth it.
Yeah.
And Jake, you shouldn't feel bad for if it feels like you often have to play this role, because you just have to be honest about how you feel. And
Well, it's just that I am honest about how I feel, and honestly, I feel very stupid a lot of the time.
Well, okay, then go for it then. I do want to say that, frankly, I'm surprised that generally you guys seem to, not hate this album as much as you don't hate it. I was expecting like a sea of fives for this band, frankly. And I'm not a huge Iceage fan. I'll be the first to say that. I like them. I think they're interesting. I enjoy listening to this record. But at the same time, they are this band that are like very, as I say, their current aesthetic is very hazy, and it is. I can definitely understand how their music would struggle to leave an impression. So yeah, but I figured we should talk about it because Iceage are this reasonably beloved band.
Oh, totally.
And I was listening to my favorite podcast that isn't the one we do is IndieCast with Stephen Hyden and Ian Cohen. And I was listening to IndieCast the other week, and they've kind of alluded to, because they talk about music that's big in the indie world, and Iceage are one of those bands that are huge and critically with indie. And they talk about how Iceage are one of those bands they've never understood the appeal of and continue to not understand the appeal of. And they were just talking about this band, and they were just like having to hold their hands up in the air and say, I don't get it. Can someone explain it to me? And I think that, every so often there is a sort of lauded, beloved sort of indie band where, all the records get best new music at Pitchfork, and everyone kind of showers praise, and you do feel that way. And so it's interesting, I think, to have those kinds of discussions about those moments and see if we can take anything away from them.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I thought like with Iceage, the first two would go, but as soon as they introduced the dinosaurs, it went really downhill.
Saoirse, I was planning on congratulating you for not making that fucking joke after we did ratings. Son of a bitch!
I stole it from Cole earlier today, so
it was bad then.
Yeah.
I was proud of you, Saoirse. I took active thought, and I was proud of you, and you pissed all over it.
Did you expect me? I don't know.
Saoirse needs
No,
to
that's
seek
why I was
shelter.
proud of you.
Saoirse needs to seek shelter from Jake. My God.
Favorite tracks and ratings. Let's go, everyone. Reverse jams in T order because I want to stop fucking talking.
Okay, my favorite tracks are Shelter Song. Vendetta is awesome. I totally agree with August there. And Love Kills Slowly. I think the first four songs and the last song are great in general. I'm going to give this record, least favorite track, if I had to pick one, would be The Wider Powder Blue. And I'm going to give it a 7.
Nice. My favorite tracks are probably Shelter Song, Love Kills Slow, and I don't know, let's say Dear Saint Cecilia. I remember liking that one a lot. And I'm going to say my least favorite, The Wider Powder Blue. Maybe there's not a song I don't like, and I'm going to give it a 7.5 out of 10.
My three favorites are Vendetta, High and Hurt, and Love Kills Slowly. Least favorite, I will say Gold City, and I will give this a 6.
Nice.
Yeah, I'd say favorites. probably Love Kills Slowly, Vendetta, and I guess High and Hurt. Least favorite would be, yeah, I don't know, probably like fucking Dear Saint Cecilia or something. I don't know, it's a 6 from me as well.
Three favorite tracks, I'd say High and Hurt, Vendetta, and I thought the track Gold City was okay. Least favorite, Dear Saint Cecilia, and I give it a 5.
Okay, I respect that a lot. That's a 6.3 on average. There are 4 albums we have at a 6.3, that being Taylor Swift's Evermore, Kylie Minogue's Disco, Lou Reed and Metallica's Lulu, and Laura Marling's A Creature I Don't Know.
We also gave a 6 point. Did you say the one we gave last week? Fortitude?
One we gave last week. It doesn't seem to be on the document I have, so I'll update.
Well, we gave 6.3 to Fortitude last week as well, which is funny, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay. Moving on then to our second review of the day, which is
I'm trying real hard. I think I made it up.
Squid is a British band based in Brighton, or originating in Brighton, sorry, based in London. They have been generating waves in recent years for their particular brand of kind of angular art rock slash, obviously the label they often get saddled with is post-punk, and I'll get into later on why I think that's not necessarily the best way of describing what they do, but nevertheless, certainly they're a part of a wave of bands that part of this British modern or neo-modern post-punk scene. Bands, many of whom we have covered. Well, many of whom, at least one of whom we've covered. We talked about Black Country New Road earlier this year. And we will be talking about Black Midi very soon as well. Their sophomore record is about to be released. And so
notably mentioned earlier in the record episode, dry cleaning fitting under this same niche.
Dry cleaning as well. So there is this scene, and the popularity of the scene, like, it is quite interesting to me because I have not, I wasn't a part of the scene of like the group of, or like the culture where this almost rabid base of fan base and rabid interest in this kind of music came up. And our podcast mate Laura is, and she probably could speak on it much more eloquently than me. I think a lot of it derives from a particular scene in live music as well. A lot of these bands cut their teeth and generated a lot of their popularity for live performances before they had even released any material. And the Squid, I think, are part of that. Squid have released an EP, I think, a couple of years ago, and have dropped loose singles over the years, but have tried to generate buzz primarily through connection with fans and this kind of sense of a homegrown band, these students getting together, and varied instrumentation in the band as well. Obviously, much like Black Country New Road, you've got a brass section and also a collection of really kind of colorful characters in the band as well, with interesting personalities and musical styles and contributions. I don't find Squid, generally speaking, to be as narratively as a band or musically coherently talented as Black Country New Road necessarily. They're certainly the band I'm going to reach for more frequently, but Squid are doing something slightly different anyway. Like all of these bands like Squid, Black Country New Road, Black Midi, etc., all kind of get lumped in together because they are a part of the same scene. But also it would be reductive to say that they all make the same kinds of music. For instance, like when we discuss the Black Midi record as well, we'll get into it. They're a much more avant-garde band, for instance, than Squid. And while you do get a kind of taste of some of the avant-garde influences of Squid, specifically bands like This Heat, who they've cited as a big influence. Also, Squid are in many ways somewhat more conventional or approachable than some of those other bands which kind of front load the weirdness and stuff, I suppose. But Anyway, what I think interested me initially about Squid is that I had no idea they existed until earlier this year, and they released the first single for this record, which is the song "Narrator." They released that early in the year, and I heard it, and the first time I heard it, I remember distinctly, I was really thrown off by it. I was confused. I didn't really understand what I was hearing, what kind of style they were trying to go for. It was like really. I don't even know how I would describe my first experience with it. But then that song gradually grew on me, and it came to be one of my favorite songs of the year. And I would say it still is. And then I found out that Squid were signed to Warp, which I thought was really interesting, because these, I would not have expected one of these kind of like homegrown British punky art rocky bands to be signed by Warp. It just seemed like such a confusing set of events. And this record obviously comes with a lot of anticipation, feverish anticipation, I would say. I was particularly hyped for this record, considering that I really liked Narrator, and I avoided digging into the other singles because I wanted to preserve the experience of this record. And yeah, I think it is a very interesting and admirable project. I can't say that it absolutely 100% floored me as a cohesive statement in the way that I hoped it might, but there are a number of things about this record and what Squid do on it that I think are worth celebrating. More than Talking Heads or any of the other kind of post-punk legends of the late 70s or 80s, Squid to me resemble the dance punk scene of the early 2000s, specifically acts like The Rapture and really early LCD Sound System as well. You can hear a bit of that filtering through the sound on this record, though I think that Squid are obviously wound tighter, and I think are more intricately interesting as a band. Like those other acts were more interested in for their kind of more electronic dancier aspects, whereas Squid, I think, are the primary thing that really gets me about them is the interplay between the musicians and the distinct style of the vocalist as well. As I mentioned, they've cited avant-garde kind of acts from that 80s fringe scene like This Heat as influences. Another band they've cited as key influences, Noi, which I think is interesting as well, because you can hear a bit of that krautrocky sound on certain parts of this record. And for instance, I think the clearest example of that is the way that the song Boy Racers opens with this watery sort of krautrock beat, which then kind of collapses into these washes of formless synth play in the second half of the track. I think this is, for starters, I really like this song. It took me a while, I think, to understand it, but that progress and that sort of structure within that song is very kind of like Noi-esque, I think. And when I learned about the kind of meaning of the song and what the song was about, I started to appreciate it even more as well. This idea of tension being built up and then kind of dissolving. And apparently it is an analog to the band's experiences during the quarantine of not being able to play live and record together, and creating the state of tension, creating the state of creative stasis, and then that kind of just dissolving into a puddle when they were able to get into a room together. The jagged rhythms of their shut-in life became a pool of messy human emotions and connections when they're reunited. And I think that is a cool aspect of this song. But I'm not going to go through all of my feelings on the songs on this record. I'll dip in and out. I do have some pretty strong feelings on certain tracks and certain aspects of this record, but I'll take a step back now and because I'm very curious to see how you guys have responded to this record and whether you guys have responded to this record and what you think of this weird little shit of an album.
Well, yeah, this weird little shit of an album, as you say. So I guess what immediately strikes me about it is that like obvious krautrocky influence, especially on a lot of the longer pieces here, which also, of course, take from some like LCD Sound System stuff. And I think that's almost most notably in the vocalist, who sounds like this weird hybrid between like a James Murphy and David Byrne almost.
Yeah, that's a good description.
And I think that he adds a real, and I would fully get comments if you found him completely obnoxious and that ruined the record for you, because it almost did for me when I first listened to this album. But I found as I kind of immersed myself in it and got along with perhaps the humor of it, I found some of the longer tracks in that sense where this album really shines and where he's able to go places with his voice in really fun, fascinating ways. Like, I think Narrator is probably my favorite song on here. I love the way that song uses its like 8.5 minute runtime to build up to this, to build slowly up to this just massive, enormous climax. And this album is, in a sense, very quarantine influenced, because a lot of the imagery presented is very like conformalist and a lot about obeying some higher force, be it your subconscious or a like an oppressive government on some of the tracks here, or even like on the opener GSK, just obeying one's own addiction. And I think that theme of adherence to authority is really interesting here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's absolutely caked all over this record. I find, because the first few times I listened to this record, I was just kind of absorbing the sound of it and the instrumentation and the way that the people in this band communicate with each other through their instruments and the way they construct these really intricate and tightly wound songs. But then the more time I spent with this record, the more listens I gave it, the more I was able to actually dig into the subject matter of this record and a lot of these songs as well, which I think is where this record is elevated from just, sounds very impressive and these guys are very talented at their instruments, to, okay, this is a band with a clear vision for their album. That absolutely. I think is a really crucial aspect of why, on the whole, it works. And I think Narrator is a really good place to zero in on. It's also my favorite song on the record. And as I said, one of my favorite songs of the year. And that's certainly not to discount any other songs on the record. There's another song on this record that's really hot on its tails in terms of how much I love it. But Narrator...
I would have to expect that. Is that the last one?
It's not actually. It's Paddling. It's Paddling.
Okay.
But I'll get to that. But Narrator is this really interesting song about this. So it's inspired by, this is a really interesting point of influence, is that this is inspired by the Bygone film, Long Day's Journey into Night.
One of the best films of that year, in my opinion.
I would heartily agree. And basically what the song is about is this, I'll take the words of the band because I don't really see the point in me paraphrasing. Basically, the song is about a man who is losing the distinction between memory, dream, and reality, and how you can often mold your memories of people to fit a narrative that benefits your ego. And so basically, it is this song about this self-centered character who tries to create his own reality, basically, with parts for each person to play. And what is interesting about this song is that you have an additional vocalist on this track, Martha Skye Murphy, who provides a really interesting counterpoint to the protagonist of this story. And so they brought her on to basically be this figure who is trapped in, or is a part of this world that this narrator is constructing, who wants to kind of break free of this world and have independence to create her own reality, basically. It's very Charlie Kaufman-esque, actually, now that I'm saying it out loud. And so you have this incredible, and this is where I think the vocal style of the singer, Oliver Judge, is well utilized to suit the topic of the song as well, because he has this kind of like demanding and fulsome and aggressive tonality in his vocal performance here, and it suits the character that he's playing. But then the way that Martha Skye Murphy comes into this track with a vocal counterpoint that's very different. She's speaking much more softly, but also gradually asserting her own voice more and more as the song goes on. And then through that swirling climax in the second half, where both of them are just kind of like rising together,
and they're
and
just
kind of
shouting
battling.
that phrase, "I'll play mine," over and over again.
Yeah.
Which very obvious what that's referring to in the context of the song.
Yeah, exactly. And she's coming in like, let me play, let me narrate, I'll play my part. And at first it seems like she is almost like, trying to concede to him and say, hey, I will do whatever you tell me to do. But then it becomes clear, I think, that she's actually trying to escape the bonds that she's being held in. And it's a really compelling and awesome song that has a level of sophistication that I think is really impressive, and I just think that it's such a dope song, and I really love it to bits.
I would agree, and I think you make a great point about its vocals and how like the characters he plays are where that really shines. I think GSK is another great moment of this, where he's, as I take it, essentially playing this guy running from like essentially pill popping and going from store to store, and that frantic urgency in his voice, I think, really well captures that.
Yeah, what that song GSK reminded me of specifically, and it wasn't cited as an influence, but I wouldn't be surprised if it influenced it to a certain extent, is American Psycho, because there are these allusions in this song to like a sort of yuppie lifestyle and these kind of like faux images of like a conservative utopia where everyone is kind of like, I hope my dinner is warm when I get home, wearing suits and that kind of like this kind of really kind of lifeless existence, basically, and that is juxtaposed really nicely with how fucking frantic the vocals sound on this record when he's like literally screaming Concrete Island, which I love the way he enunciates that. It's so fucking awesome.
How did he enunciate it again?
Fuck you. But yeah, it's just really charismatic and fun, and I think this band also uses repetition, like vocal repetition, really effectively as well, to kind of drill stuff into your head. Like, I'm speeding along, and you get a real sense of the monotony of what the song is about. But they do that, I think, in a track like this anyway. There are other parts in the record where maybe it doesn't work quite as well, but they do it here in a way that I think is really amusing and fun, and it really gets you into it. So yeah, that's another song that I gets a fucking full tick from me. In fact, basically every song on this record up to and including Paddling, I think is brilliant. I think this record starts incredibly strong, and I'll get into Paddling and then I'll kind of take a step back again, because I absolutely love this song. I like it basically as much as Narrator. I like Narrator a little bit more because I think it's a bit more significant for the record, but it is just this incredible art punk song. It has these rigid but playful grooves, has an absolutely fantastic chorus that I absolutely love, and I've had stuck in my head. There are people inside. I've been singing that to myself all week. And I love the contrast and the musical dynamics of this song as well. The chorus is quite different from the other vocal parts of the song. It's quite tuneful and almost pretty, and it has those kind of cascading, almost atonal guitar lines flowing through it. It's just awesome. And then you have, towards the end of the song, this absolutely fantastic modular synth comes in, and it just balloons the guitar sound at the end of the song. The way they described it is trying to make the guitar sound like race cars at the end of the track, and it really does have that effect. It has this great sense of tension and build, like Narrator does as well, except it feels like this is the tension and build of a song like Narrator, except it's transfused into a more kind of pop-centric song. And I think that's really successful, and I love it, to be honest, when they do that kind of thing.
I suppose I'll go ahead and say my thoughts on this thing. It's interesting. There's a lot of really highs. I'm similarly hot on Narrator. I'll also throw out Peel Street, but my absolute favorite is the final track, Pamphlets, which is one of my favorite songs of the year. Just all 8 minutes of it, just energizing as hell. Really fun track, never loses its momentum. And a lot of the album conjures sort of similar feelings for me in that regard, but I also can't help but feeling like there is a fair amount of bloat here. I think the album has a really sizable pacing problem. It feels like they sort of made this like it was the last album they were ever going to make. And instead of it having a sort of Bedlam and Goliath effect of like, we're just going to go ape shit on all of this, it's more of a, let's just put every idea we have on the album, every sort of fully formed one anyway. And it kind of, yeah, I wouldn't say tanks because I do enjoy the album a decent amount, but it does harm the album greatly. I feel like this should be like a lean 45 minutes, and instead it's nearly an hour.
Yeah. I mean, it's already been compared to the Black Country New Road, so I'm gonna invoke that again, because like the thing that made, and that obviously coming from a similar scene, right? But the thing that made that album so exciting is that like every song on that record was like really focused on being the thing that it is, and they're all totally fleshed out. And there are a couple of songs on this record that are like that. It had some amazing highs. I want to echo Pamphlets. Love that song. But when I think about a lot of the bands that are coming out of this scene, the emotions that I get from this record, even when it's really hitting, I guess, which is a lot, it's a good album. I suppose I listen to it and I feel like I don't know what I'm getting emotionally from this record that I'm not getting from other albums in the scene that I think hit a higher mark more often. And that's just the thing that keeps preventing me from really clicking with this record. And it's a shame because these guys are clearly very talented. I think, and I'm going to echo a tweet Tyler made here, I think the hype cycle around this album has actually too much for my liking to do with it, just in terms of how I think about myself and how I interact with music. I'm not comfortable with how much my expectations for this album have been influenced by the hype cycle. And that's a comment on me, not anyone else. Because it's like, this has been such a talked about record online. And it's a very promising debut, but that's about all it is to me.
Yeah, I wanted to try and escape the hype cycle. And I think if there's one context in which we can escape the hype cycle, it is very much this podcast that we do, because we're nicely kind of inured from that. Like, obviously, I enjoy this scene of music, and I love the Black Country New Road record, and I'm very excited for the Black Midi record. But at the same time, I don't have this kind of feverish response to the scene of music Absolutely. That some other people have. And I agree broadly, not even broadly, I agree. I think we probably would all come down on similar points in terms of the weaknesses of this album and how they manifest. I think there's a certain point, I mean, specifically with Documentary Filmmaker, where it feels like the band sort of stop. I mean, it also, I think, particularly is glaring for me anyway, compared to how fantastic that opening run is. GSK, Narrator, Boy Racers, and Paddling. I mean, I love those songs. And then Documentary Filmmaker hits, and it's like, okay, I see what you're doing. You're stripping it back a little bit. You're obviously doing something interesting with the subject matter of the track as well. But at the same time, it just doesn't feel like much more than a demo that, I don't know, a more confident band would have really kind of fleshed out. There is a nice kind of Steve Reich-esque quality to the horns on this track, and I think that could have been built up into something that is quite immediate and grooving and driving, but they choose not to.
I think that, that's a really interesting point. Like, I mean, if you are obviously going to take a bit from Steve Reich, I would say screw it and just do something full on ambient style, make something
That's why
expansive.
that's
and I
why I
think that would
like
be
what happens
interesting.
in Boy Racers so much, because it's like
Oh yeah, absolutely.
they're doing Nui, but they're doing both the first Nui record style where it's like driving grooves and stuff, and they're doing like Nui 75 style where it's like proper synth washes and ambience and shit, and they're kind of colliding it into one song. And I think it does work there. But yeah, there are other moments on the record where they try to do just the synthy hazy stuff like Documentary Filmmaker, and some of that the interlude that I think follows it, where I'm not quite fully on board, or at least I don't necessarily see how it builds or adds to the structure of the album. I think another particular weakness as well is the track Global Groove, which is probably my least favorite song on this record. And again,
It's
there
also
are
probably the most condescending song on the record, to be honest.
well, like, there are ideas here that I think are really good, and I think the subject matter of the song is really interesting. The whole idea of the song is that the news desensitizes you to violence, basically, and so when your country invades another country or escalates its participation in a particular war, you don't really have an animated response. That is a really interesting idea, and I think there are certain sentiments in the song, some lyrics that I think get at that in a good way, but I think I generally probably do agree with you, Saoirse, that the tone of the song is a little too blunt, especially compared to how effective they are at getting at similar kind of dystopic societal images in other parts of the record. And the song itself also just never really comes to life. It's just kind of limp. Maybe that's part of the design. Maybe that's kind of like a point of ironic contrast, where it's like we're dancing to the global groove, but the groove is total numbness, total desensitization, and so they're capturing that with the song.
I can totally see that intent, but it would be much easier, as indeed I have done in the past, to swallow more like you're part of the common groove, wake up sheeple message if like it was part of a song I was having more fun listening to.
Yeah, it's a real bold, ironic, controversial statement they made on this album, or this song rather, specifically by being boring.
And something I actually think is rather interesting about this record, just contextually, is that like this is really obviously becoming a proper scene to be recognized, and is post-punk is like the best label for it, but it's not really. And I'm going to be really interested to see how music writers talk about this emerging scene in the future.
What's interesting about that, Saoirse, is that because the music journalist narrative, for the most part, is so Americanized and so American-centric, rather, I should say, and this is a very distinctly European scene. I think a lot of the kind of big heavy hitter music journalists have kind of not really known how to approach it. And that's interesting. I just noticed before we started recording that a new IndieCast episode came out, and they talk about the new wave of British post-punk. So I'm looking forward to listening to that and seeing what these American critics I like have to say. But it does seem like, in many ways, this is like a thing for the kids, basically, that has left a lot of people who aren't a part of that feeling kind of a bit bewildered. Like, this is actually kind of cool what you guys are doing, and it is really kind of interesting. But at the same time, like, I don't understand the feverish love that it's getting. And this is a conversation that I actually had with Jake earlier in the week, where I think Jake expressed a similar feeling of like, okay, yeah, I mean, these guys are doing something that's really, cool, and they're creative and stuff, but like, I mean, what is the circle jerk? And that's interesting. Like, I had a couple of theories when I was tweeting Jake about this, and one of them was that like it's this very homegrown scene, right? And these are bands that are built around build their reputation around their live performances. Black Midi is like, that's the narrative of Black Midi, basically, is that they became a big deal because people are like, you have to go and see this band. They're putting on these amazing, crazy shows. And that's also an aspect of all of these bands that has a commonality. And so for me, I guess part of it is the sense of familial connection that you get when you bond with someone, a band who is doing, or a scene that is something new that feels like you're a part of it. And like and you're one of the first people on the ground for this band, and so it starts to become the cool hip thing that people kind of gravitate towards because of this connection that starts in a very micro way and starts to balloon outwards. I don't know if I have a lot of insights into the level of feverishness beyond that. I guess perhaps something to do with the fact that all of these bands are comprised of really young people. So kids who Zoomers who are some of the loudest and most vocal in music communities are gravitating towards them for that sense. Another aspect is the diversity as well. Like we touched on this, I think, when we talked about Black Country New Road, where it's like a band where you have people of all genders and races, and it's this collective of people as opposed to just like, you know, your typical 4-person rock band. It's like a sense of a collective, perhaps, is also part of the reason why people are gravitating into this scene. But I don't know, your guess is as good as mine.
I mean, something I'd say about what attracts me to these groups being sort of Black Midi, Black Country New Road, Squid, and also I could also talk about the latest Shame record as well.
Yeah, Shame are totally a part of that scene as well. Good show.
Yeah.
Thank you. Is that like, yeah, a lot of these bands are British, and I feel like their approach to this sort of quasi post-punk and just including a lot of like chaos, I guess, and strange songwriting choices and longer songs that often are structurally difficult and then build to extraordinarily cathartic climaxes. I guess Shame the more traditionally post-punk way, I guess, but Black Midi and Black Country New Road especially is that it really captures like a seething underbelly of like anger that exists in the British zeitgeist at the moment, and it feels like without ever having to be explicitly political, with exceptions. They tap into a really deeply felt political anger in the country at the moment.
I think maybe that's part of the reason why I kind of get a bit tired of, not necessarily tired, but like I feel like a lot of these bands get described as post-punk, which I think is not an unfair label to assign them, but it's also a label that I think is used so often now to describe like rock music that is unconventional, that I feel like the boundaries of it are kind of a little bit lost. And also, in a sense, what you're touching on, the sense of genuine kind of anger that underlies and underpins it. It's not like it doesn't have the kind of postmodernism, I guess, of a lot of what I associate with post-punk. It feels very kind of sincere and just and so in that sense, it is kind of more akin to kind of like a modern punk to me. I call it art punk because it is kind of like a punk ethos infused with kind of like an art school sensibility. But I don't know, maybe the genre thing is just like a pointless and meaningless argument, but I don't know, it keeps coming up and I keep feeling like there should be a new word for this, but I don't know what it is.
I feel exactly the same way. It could end up being a thing like, you know, like no wave or pig fuck or something, where it's just a thing that exists for a bit and goes away.
Maybe, who knows?
I find Black Country New Road to be a bit more of a singular voice. I think if like I'm not trying to like compare it in terms of quality, I'm trying to compare it in terms of style, and because they're from the same scene, it's the most immediate thing that comes to mind. But that's a bit more singular. Like you can hear the influences there, but you can still definitely tell that they're very much doing their own thing. Here, I felt that a little bit less. I think it's a little bit less confident, and like the comparison to David Byrne was really on point, because like those vocal deliveries are just like the entire album is just so Talking Heads in that aspect. Like that was what I kept thinking of the whole time. And yeah, I'll be honest, dude is emotive in a way that just kind of pricks at me in a way I don't really like. Sometimes he just goes a bit too hard, a bit too cartoony, and I just don't like that delivery at all. Like I can sit through it, I can go through the rest of the song, the rest of the song can be good, but like, not for me. Nope, absolutely not. And yeah, there's just sort of a point where the album just kind of stops. Like, it doesn't do anything like bad or actively hindering itself, but it's just kind of like you had all of these ideas in like this front half of the album, and then it just kind of if like I'll definitely echo the sentiment that I think Pamphlets is good. It's just that, good gracious, I was really worn out by the time Global Groove came along, and I don't care for that song at all. But yeah, I'm just basically echo the sentiments of pretty much everyone, is that I think it's good and interesting. It's just not for me. So, you know.
Yeah, what I would say with the Black Country New Road comparison as well is that BC&R, at least with that record, it felt like they were fully formed. Like they knew exactly what they were, and they knew exactly the record they wanted to make. And it has a very consistent sound. It's a very tight album. Whereas this, in many ways, it's like the first Black Midi album, more like that than the Black Country New Road record. I think I like the Black Midi album a little bit more, but they're about the same for me. And it's that there's great songs on it, and there are really great ideas. And this is a really creative band, and they are immensely talented. In fact, Black Midi are, I would say definitely a better band than Squid. On the whole, immensely talented, definitely incredibly original. And there are moments on that first Black Midi record where that manifests into really great songs. And then there are other moments on that Black Midi record where it feels like there are just tracks that are collections of those ideas that haven't found a full form yet. And that, I think, is a similar thing that this record has. Even if I think it's a bit more jarring on this record and obvious in the way that a lot of those unformed stuff are cleaved into the back half of the record. So I'm really interested to see, obviously I'll be really interested to see how Squid move on from here and with whatever subsequent music they make. But it's also like, I'm also interested to see what Black Midi do on this new Black Midi record, because in many ways it feels like to me, I am hoping that I'm hoping that the next Black Midi record will be what I wanted this to be and what I wanted the first Black Midi record to be, and what I got from Black Country New Road, not necessarily in terms of how it sounds, but in terms of the assuredness of this incredibly creative band being able to focus their ideas into the songwriting.
Yeah, and just to kind of finish off my thoughts in terms of a bit of the song structure stuff, I think, that back half has a bit of a pronounced issue in terms of that structuring of songs, like Peel Street and 2010 notably being songs where I think they have some really rad guitar parts at the starts of both of those songs, but they blow their loads far too early within their run times before it like can build into something really interesting, I think.
You know what, on reflection, it's not even that there's definitely enough ideas here, enough fully formed great ideas here for a full album. They should have just done what Black Country New Road were like, we'll put out a 6-song album. We don't need to put more than 6 songs on the album. So what I reckon Squid should have done a similar thing. Just put GSK, Narrator, Boy Racers, Paddling. I would say Peel Street's great. Put that on, then Pamphlets, and leave it at that. The other songs,
I think that would have been fine.
Yeah, exactly. That would have been plenty for an album. So yeah, that is potentially maybe where the record, because I think the record does demand a lot of the listener, even in its great moments. And so if you're going to be making these demanding songs like Narrator, then, and Boy Racers, for instance, then you should not also then demand the listener be patient through stuff that is more noodly and esoteric. Like, I don't know, maybe that sounds really entitled and self-righteous, but I think you get what I mean. Like, yeah. Ease off on the gas, guys. That's basically where we're at. Great, very good album. I think I'm very interested to see where this band goes from here. And Narrator, Paddling, and Pamphlets, and GSK and Boy Racers, they're all going to be on rotation for me for a lot of the year. So just those songs. So yeah, basically that's it. All right, favorite tracks and ratings. Jake, you kick us off this time.
My 3 favorite tracks are probably GSK, Narrator, and Pamphlets. Least favorite track is Global Groove, and I give it a 6.
Favorite tracks for myself, Narrator, GSK, and Pamphlets. Least favorite would be Global Groove. I'd give it a 7.
My 3 favorites are Pamphlets, Narrator, and Peel Street. Least favorite, I'll probably say The Flyover. Yeah, I'll go 6.5.
So my favorite tracks are probably Pamphlets, let's say Boy Racers, and I'm going to shout out If Peel Street Could Talk.
Fuck
Least
you!
favorite-
I was fucking. I was resisting making that exact joke.
It's real bad when you want to chastise her for making a joke, but it's even worse when you want to chastise her for making the joke because you were going to make the joke.
Well, this is the thing. I was like, I'm not gonna make this joke, right? I'm not gonna make it, because I know it's just gonna make people mad.
We
See,
have
that's-
fun here.
We do
That's
have
what I
fun.
set out to do. And my least favorite.
Well,
was-
you achieved it. Whoop-de-doo.
Whoop-de fuck.
Do you now feel fulfilled?
a little bit. And
Fuck
my
you!
And my least favorite is Global Groove. That's getting a 7.
My 3 favorite tracks are Narrator, Paddling, and I'm actually gonna say I'm gonna make GSK the third one just because the way that this man pronounces the word concrete, I don't know who thinks of that. Also, dope JG Ballard reference, bro. And the album gets, or least favorite, Global Groove, and the album gets a 7.5 from me.
Oh, nice. So that's a 7.8 on average.
6.8.
6.8, thank you. Getting Its Knives, Winter Music Part 3, Metallica, The Black Album, 7 Swans.
I just want to point out that our last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 new release reviews have all been either 5 or 6 averages. So we really need some good shit, like some real good shit to happen.
Some of us got some real good shit, and then others of us were,
If only someone released an album good enough so that everyone gave it above a certain number.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we'll see. We'll
totally.
see. We'll see what happens.
See.
I mean,
You know,
look.
if-
all I'm saying is that just some of us jettisoned Manchester Orchestra's gift, and that is all.
That's true. That's a valid point.
In a stretch like this, what we need is just one of us to step up to the plate and put something out that's good enough.
I wonder what in the hell we've been talking about for the past 10 minutes that it's felt like
No
this
idea.
bit. has-
Glacier Flower 21 out now.
I was about to say, like, you couldn't
Thank
be
you.
you couldn't be less subtle if you were using a sledgehammer there.
Yeah.
All right, so those are our reviews. So let us know what you think of the albums we discussed today. What are your thoughts on the Iceage record? What are your thoughts on the Squid album? What are your thoughts on our discussions? Did we leave anything out? Did we miss anything? Let us know in the comments below. Next week, we're going to be reviewing, August and Mason's new record, Glacier Flower 21, which you can go and download in the description below. Also check out the interview that I did with August and Mason. It's really dope. All that shit is in the doobly-doo. We'll also be reviewing St. Vincent's new album next week, Daddy's Home. So I'm looking forward to talking about that record as well. But we have more content coming. If you're watching this on the day of release, we have more content coming as well. Stick around for our Record Club review of Negative Land's Dyspepsy, which is going to be a really interesting conversation. A Plunderphonics satire record that will be a lot of fun to try and unpack. And also stick around for the next installment of our 1991 retrospective, which we're also recording today and is going to be on De La Soul's album, De La Soul is Dead. So plenty of content happening. If you haven't checked out the last few videos, you can go and hit the channel up and check out the most recent uploads for some of those gems. And yeah, that's basic. Oh, also go and check out Jake's book as well. Since we're plugging shit, Go check out the content that we've made, because we put the respective makers of the content put their respective asses into it. Not literally.
Yeah.
Put our whole pussy into this shit.
Exactly.
That's it. Well, as always, folks, rock over London, rock on Chicago, Toyota, let's go places.